But I want to thank Barry and Clark so much for setting this up, and for Cameron. Thanks for all that you do to make the Generals Redoubt the effective organization that it is. And we are making a difference here on campus. A lot of what we do is simply communicating with the alumni to tell them what's going on campus and sharing our perspective. And our perspective on Robert E. Lee is that Robert E. Lee and George Washington are two of the greatest examples of character and honor in American history, and we should be proud of them. And their assets are tremendous assets for the university. But lately they've been treated more like liabilities than assets. They've been de-emphasized across the campus, and some may say even erased. And so that's really what motivated me to tell the story, and in particular about Robert E. Lee. You know, he went from being one of the most admired figures in America to one of the most despised in a relatively short period of time. And it really picked up, it started really with, as Tom mentioned, Charlottesville in 2017, but really picked up steam I call it the crazy pandemic year of 2020, the aftermath of George Floyd. The mobs started attacking monuments, and they condemned Lee as a racist and a traitor and a defender of slavery, and he was none of those things. Yet his name became synonymous with white supremacy, and it's been removed from military bases and schools and streets, and even Lee Chapel here on campus. So I've been a student of Robert E. Lee since 4th grade. I've been fascinated with him all my life, and so I'm very well familiar. I'm very familiar with his viewpoints, and I know that his views are completely at odds with the common narrative of him. So when all these measures were taken, Tom mentioned when the board kept the name, but then they took several steps to minimize Lee's presence on the campus. And so it struck me that a lot of people are embarrassed by or ashamed of the university's affiliation with Lee. And I've always felt like Robert E. Lee, we should never feel like we need to apologize for Robert E. Lee, but given the narrative that's out there about him, the gross misrepresentations about him, I do recognize there's a real need to tell his story, to explain it, especially to the younger generation. And so that was my goal, my mission in writing this book, is to tell the truth about Lee. And I'm not going to keep you here because I just did a 30-minute recording for C-SPAN, so you can see more on C-SPAN here in a couple weeks if you want. But I'm just going to, in a nutshell, say, the summary of Lee is that the truth is he was opposed to slavery. Before the war, he called slavery a moral and political evil. And then after the war, he said that he was rejoiced that slavery was abolished. And the truth is that he was opposed to secession. He warned of the dire consequences of what would happen if the Union were dissolved. And he held out hope to the very end that the Union might be preserved. But in fact, Lincoln offered Lee command of the army that he was raising, 75,000 soldiers, to invade the South and put down the rebellion. But Lee said that he could not take part in an invasion of his home state. And he said that if he owned all the slaves in the South, he would gladly give them up to save the Union. So that he did not fight to defend slavery. He fought because he believed it was his duty to defend Virginia. And then finally, after the war, Lee was a leading voice for reconciliation. He did everything he could to restore peace and harmony between the North and the South. And even though he lost everything in the war, he was not embittered. He bore his suffering with dignity and grace. And so that's kind of the story of Lee in a nutshell, and it's one that we should embrace as parents or alumni, students of Washington and Lee. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the Generals Redoubt. So I'll stop there unless others have questions. But I appreciate your being here, and would be happy to sign books, compliments of the Generals Redoubt, and encourage you all. We welcome your support. The Generals Redoubt, as Tom mentioned, we're going to have our headquarters opening up next spring, just a few miles from here, and really look forward to seeing a lot of you there in a few months. It's going to be a spectacular place, and appreciate all that. I see some students here from the Spectator. Love our affiliation with the Spectator. And that's another thing I just want to mention. What the Generals Redoubt does is we support groups like the Spectator, and we bring speakers to campus that otherwise might not be here. We were one of the largest funders of speakers for mock convention last year, and so we are making a difference in building bridges to not just the student body, but to other alumni and the board. So thanks, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, enjoy it.
Questions for Gib? Anyone? Or maybe you want to ask him while he's signing your book for you?
I look forward to reading your book.
Well,
congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey,
It's an honor to write it.
Gib, how did you become so fascinated with Robert E. Lee in the 4th grade? That's,
You know, I still have the report that I wrote from 4th grade. I don't know how I picked the topic,
right.
but I wrote a report on Robert E. Lee, and the last line of it was that he was president of Washington and Lee University. So as a 4th grader, growing up in Kansas City, most people in Kansas City hadn't heard of Washington and Lee, but I did. And so I've always been fascinated with him, especially because he used to be admired universally, North and South, because he was such a great man. And as I mentioned earlier, it's he's been picked. There's the Saul Alinsky line of pick your target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. And so the haters came for Lee a few years ago, and they personalized him, and they picked him as their target, and unfairly canceled him. And he deserves to be uncanceled. Hence the title of the book.
Thanks.
Other questions? There's a question in the back.
Obviously you're a historian of Robert E. Lee. Would you say that he had a character flaw? And if so, what was it?
No, I don't think he did have a character flaw. Some would say that as a military commander, he was flawed in that he was too polite, and sometimes he wasn't as quick to reprimand junior officers or make changes in personnel that he should have because he was so polite. But that's hardly a character flaw. And I always talk about that. What made him such an amazing man was he was the perfect blend of the softer character traits of kindness and humility and piety, along with the more manly traits of courage and strength and honor. And he was the perfect blend of that. As I said earlier, he was the man that every Southern male aspired to be. And he was the son that every Southern mother hoped to raise. So he was really the embodiment of virtue. Thanks for your question. Cameron?
I know there's a lot of parents here who maybe don't have a long invested relationship with WNL, right? Maybe their students heard about WNL for the first time. What would you say to a parent that's in this room that hasn't grown up with sort of a reputation lovingly since 4th grade? What would you say to them as to understanding why it's not just about a statue being taken down or a name removed, like what the greater implications of losing Lee's legacy, specifically at Washington and Lee, what that does to, the community of WNL?
Yeah. Well, Lee had a huge impact on the culture at WNL. It was Lee that really inspired the student-run honor code. And, his definition of a gentleman, he was asked, what are the rules here? And he said, we have but one rule, that every student must be a gentleman. That kind of summed up everything in it. And then after Lee died, they found among his papers his definition of a gentleman. So I'm sure most of you have probably seen Lee's definition of a gentleman. But, it was really, kind of the golden rule, but spelled out much more eloquently than that. And so that was really his legacy here: honor, character, gentlemanly behavior, and treating others as you would wish to be treated.
Here's the question.
The general question with regards to general readout and what efforts do we need to take? I don't want to use re-education because that's not it. Just educating and informing the general public about the aspects of general leave that people don't know. So a lot of us are here because we're one way or another affiliated with one organization or the other that's affiliated with the general readout. But this information at this point is somewhat inside. It's an insider information. The rest of the society have this other notion of who the general lead is based on the information or misinformation that has been put out there. So besides those of us who have some kind of connection with general readout or a spectator or something else on campus, what efforts are being put to kind of correct the notion and correctly portray general lead as it should be?
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of our mission at the Generals Redoubt, and Cameron just produced some great, really short 3-minute videos on Lee, and now we're working on videos of George Washington too. So, we're posting those on social media, on our website, and we're kind of in a culture war, and we're foot soldiers in the culture war, you might say. And so we're doing our part, writing a book, putting together videos, inviting speakers to campus, and doing everything we can. And if part of the Free Speech Alliance, Tom, to his credit, has really helped take this initiative, not just about Robert E. Lee, but about freedom of speech in general on campus. And now we're up to how many chapters?
27. We've got 7 more cooking.
Yeah.
5 to 6.
So our message is really reverberating with alumni and other schools around the country that there's not enough ideological diversity on campus. It's skewed all in one direction, and dissenting opinions are unfortunately kind of censored, and we're pushing back against that. Yes.
Doing leadership at the school that feels safe to be a part of an organization like this, whereas even possibly there'd be a professor that could make this required reading somehow, that even if it was to just so that the discussion could be there.
Yeah.
How is that?
Well, if they're out there, we'd love to meet them. We have had some kind of informal back channel discussions with board members and faculty. But sadly, there's kind of this environment where a lot of people just keep their head low. They don't want to speak up. And so they're self-censoring. And that's really the frightening thing, because the university should be a place where all ideas should be welcomed and discussed. And that's not the case anymore. Not just here, but all over the place.
So along that line, this other group, the Alumni Free Speech Alliance, is working with some partners, one of whom is known as Braver Angels, which has put together a very unique, what they call this College Debate and Discourse Alliance. And they're basically putting on programs. They put one on here September 26th, which Cameron participated in, which brings a very unusual approach to debating, where the debating isn't, there's a winner and there's a loser. The debating process is about finding the truth or exposing people to a variety of ideas that ultimately, when you sort through them, will provide the truth. And so Cameron can actually, I think, speak to that along with anything else that he would like to, as being a goal that we have for more of that to occur in terms of big campus debates or classroom debates about classroom subjects and topics that are knotty issues of one kind or another, so that the students learn the techniques, the ability, the listening skills, the articulation skills to make their points and to speak in nuanced ways about these issues, rather than there being a far this position and a far this position and nothing happening in between. So we think there are great opportunities to build that piece of the education to a much more significant degree. And the reason we're passionate about it was that 60 years ago when I was here, we had that. I went through a trial on September 13th with this, the most marvelous educational experience I've had in 30 years. It was fabulous. And Cameron, you might want to speak to what happened on September 26th. I'm very encouraged.
Yeah. Well, let's give a hand for Gib first for his great talk.